Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. Nobody has pulled the curtain back on the political class more in the last decade than Peter Schweizer. You know him from books like Clinton Cash, Secret Empires, Red-Handed. Well, he's got a new one. It's called Blood Money, Why the Powerful Turn a Blind Eye While China Kills Americans. Pretty damning accusation. Peter Schweizer is the president of Government Accountability Institute and, again, the best-selling author of the book Blood Money, Why the Powerful Turn a Blind Eye While China Kills Americans, which is available now in all the usual spots. Peter Schweizer, thanks so much for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Good to be with you. Thanks for having me.
So I've only had a chance to read some of the excerpts that have been made available to this point, but I'm looking forward to the full read. But from some of what I've read, it's pretty interesting. The connections you make, the historical connections, including with respect to fentanyl, China ostensibly doing to us what the British did to them during the Opium Wars.
Yeah, it's revenge for the Opium Wars, and I think the biggest misnomer that people have about the fentanyl crisis are twofold. Number one is just another drug addiction problem. It's not. Most of the people that die of fentanyl poisoning don't even know they're taking fentanyl. They think they're taking an Adderall or a Vicodin. You know, some kids trying to study late night for a test. But the second one is that this is a problem caused by the Mexican drug cartels. The drug cartels are the junior partners. China runs this operation. They provide the precursors that come from Mexico. 90% of those precursors come into a port in Mexico in Manzanillo. That international terminal is run by a Chinese company. That's why people cannot seem to stop this flow. Those chemicals are sent to a town in northern Mexico where 2,000 Chinese nationals, according to Department of Homeland Security documents I obtained, 2,000 Chinese nationals create the fentanyl for the cartels. The cartels use Chinese pill presses to turn the fentanyl into the pills that they sell on the streets. When the drug cartels were operating in the United States, they used Chinese communication devices because they know the Chinese will not share those communications with U.S. law enforcement. And finally, the laundering of the money. The Mexican drug cartels used to launder their money in Latin American banks. They launder them in Chinese state-owned banks now with the help oftentimes of Chinese students here on education visas. So this is a Chinese operation to kill as many Americans as possible. And fentanyl poisoning is now the leading cause of death among Americans under the age of 45.
And so when we see, before we get to the government's role in all this, and the Biden family in particular, but so when we see, as everybody has seen over the last several weeks, thousands of military-age Chinese individuals coming through, for example, a hole in the fence in the San Diego sector, what are we to make of that?
Well, you're to make of that you know, some of them may be here just trying to seek a better life, but there is plenty of precedent for Chinese illegals engaging in criminal activity in the United States. One of the biggest problems we have in the country, I talk about in the book, is a massive increase in illegal marijuana growth operations. This is not the marijuana that's legalized. This is far more potent. And these are run by Chinese illegals that are in the country. In the state of Maine alone, according to the Department of Homeland Security, there are more than 300 illegal marijuana growth operations being carried out by Chinese nationals involving Chinese organized crime. When you look at some of the social disruptions we've had in the country, you had a unit of Chinese military officers in the summer of 2020 that came working out of the consulate, the Chinese consulate in Houston, Texas, that were trying to fan the flames of social protests. So, yeah, some of them may be coming here seeking a better life. The problem is you can't distinguish them from those that are here to engage in illegal activities that are designed to do damage to America.
And so with, government knowledge, as you're citing Department of Homeland Security as the source for a lot of this information, with federal government knowledge about what is going on, why does President Xi get treated with kid gloves when he comes to San Francisco? Why is this not, why are we not hearing this from elected officials, starting with the President of the United States instead of Peter Schweizer?
Good question. So a lot of people in Washington don't want to talk about it because they just go along to get along. If you accept the reality of what's going on, you cannot have a normal relationship with China. You can't talk about a trade agreement. You have to confront these realities. And there's just a lot of people in Washington that don't want to do that. Then you have a smaller, more narrow group of people that have massive conflicts because there are financial connections. Consider the Bidens. The Sinaloa cartel, they are the kings of fentanyl in Mexico. They were set up by a Chinese criminal gang called UBG. This is well established, well documented in Mexico and elsewhere. One of the leaders of that gang is a guy named Zhang Anlo, who goes by the name White Wolf. One of White Wolf's business partners gave $5 million to the Biden family. Does Joe Biden really want to have a conversation about fentanyl and about China's role? No, he doesn't. So when he meets with Xi, he goes out of his way to say, we want your help, but we're not pointing fingers. And he certainly does not call them out publicly. If you look at Governor Gavin Newsom of California, he has a long association with members of Chinese organized crime syndicates, going back to when he was mayor of San Francisco. He appointed the head of Chinatown's redevelopment in San Francisco. A guy that he appointed was a dragonhead in Chinese organized crime. He became friends with another leader of Chinese organized crime who went by the name Shrimp Boy. He actually donated city taxpayer money to his nonprofit. He had a guy on his transition team that was later charged with a murder-for-hire plot for Chinese organized crime. When Gavin Newsom, as mayor, set up China SF, which is designed to bring Chinese investment dollars into the United States, he could have pretty much picked anybody in China. He picked a man named Vincent Lo, a Chinese businessman in mainland China, who was already known to have ties with Chinese organized crime. And as a result of that China SF program brought into the United States Chinese companies with links to Chinese organized crime who were involved massively in the drug trade. So, again, does Gavin Newsom really want to confront China and have a conversation about this? No, because it's deeply embarrassing and damaging to some of the choices that he's made in the past.
Well, I've been to 2 fentanyl funerals, sadly, young kids that died way too early. And one question that was asked is, why do they want to kill our children? Why do the Chinese and people in Mexico want to bring harm to our kids?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So China, really since 2010, has carried out a policy called disintegration warfare. That's not me saying this. There's actually a Chinese publication. And disintegration warfare says, kind of in the traditions of Sun Tzu, the famous strategist, the best way to defeat your enemy is by not actually fighting him. It's by undermining him. And fentanyl is part of that. The Mexican cartels themselves, I don't think, particularly want to kill their customers as they view it, but the Chinese certainly do. And from the standpoint of the cartels, the profit margins for fentanyl compared to cocaine or heroin or any of these other drugs, the profit margins with fentanyl are 10 or 20 times greater than they are if you're selling cocaine. So for them, it's just a loss that they're prepared to accept because they're driven by money. But as far as China is concerned, this is absolutely part of their strategy. I have another section in the book that looks at COVID. We know the people that died in COVID, but China actually carried out policies that exacerbated and magnified America's body count during COVID. So this is very, very much intentional in what their approach is, which is to defeat us without actually fighting a war.
So what are some of the other prongs of their disintegration strategy? Because, we talk about Confucius Institutes at colleges, we talk about TikTok. I mean, how integrated is it, and in which of the things that we have discussed previously or we discuss openly are also part of that same strategy that you're describing?
Well, let's talk about violent crimes in the streets. In fact, in the book, I quote the sheriff of Cook County there in your area, describing these small devices called Glock switches that China began smuggling into the United States in 2018. And again, I've got Homeland Security, FBI, Department of Justice documents on this. Thousands of them. These are small devices, highly illegal in the United States, certainly highly illegal in China, where you can't even own a firearm. These switches take a normal Glock handgun and turn it into a fully automatic machine gun. And I have a quote from the sheriff of Cook County and from law enforcement around saying these are flooding into our cities from China, and we can't do anything to stop them. And the Department of Homeland Security says that these devices are particularly being marketed and given to criminal gangs in the United States. So we've reached the point where from 2018 to now, the rate of machine gun fire on America's city streets has risen by more than 1,000%. It's like, Al Capone in the 1930s. And again, this is part of the disruptive practice. It sows chaos on the streets. And of course, China state media has run several stories talking about, look at all the chaos in America. They never mention, of course, the fact that they are the ones that have been smuggling these into the United States and distributing them to criminal gangs over the last 5 years.
And on the use of technology and social media, is that part of it as well?
It is. We obviously have divisions in our country. We all know that, but they are fanning the flames. One of the things they do is they have these large operations that involve thousands of Chinese military technical experts, and they set up hundreds or thousands each individually social media accounts in the United States, and they're posing as Americans. And what they do is very simple. Half of those social media accounts say America is a hopelessly racist society, nothing can be done. The other half of these accounts posing as Americans say, I only like white people. So why are they doing this? They're doing this because they want to magnify social conflict in the United States. It's an intentional strategy. I quote from them, don't take my word for it. I name the unit that's doing this. And again, if there's something that hopeful, honestly, that comes out of this book, it's that I don't believe we're actually as divided as we think we are. I think there's a lot of the fanning of the flames that is taking place that is trying to magnify it and encourage us to be at each other's throats. And I think this is part of the Chinese strategy.
What's your assessment of the job that House Republicans are doing as they're, pursuing their impeachment inquiries, plural, with respect to these relationships, specifically, of course, the Biden family and the Chinese Communist Party and all of their organs, in addition to others. But specifically on that, Jim Comer keeps saying, we've got documented $30 million in money that's flowed from the Chinese communists to the Biden family. We don't know what they got for it. Well, you're sort of answering your own question, aren't you? So what's your assessment of the progress being made there, or the direction that has taken?
It's a good question. I think they've done a good job of letting the evidence speak for itself. They're not just going on TV and popping off and giving theories. So I think they handled that in a very good way. Disappointed, obviously, with Democrats. What Democrats are basically defending, let's just be clear here where this is headed. If what the Bidens did is okay, we're saying in the future that a president, a vice president, a secretary of defense can have their adult children collect tens of millions of dollars from our foreign adversaries for no discernible business purposes whatsoever, and we're okay with that. Because that's basically what the Bidens did. And I think the American people, in a way, are ahead of Washington, D.C. in this regard. I've looked at the polls over the last couple of months, the New York Times, the Harvard-Harris poll, ABC News, the Wall Street Journal. They have all asked the question, do you believe that Joe Biden engaged in highly unethical behavior or illegal behavior in order to help his family's business dealings? And in every single one of those polls, at least 65% of the American people say yes. So the American people see what's going on. I think the American people are ahead of it. I think that we've reached this binary point in American politics where you have elected Democrats. It doesn't matter what Joe Biden does, because of their dislike for Donald Trump, they are not going to criticize him for it. And that's a sad case because, again, one thing I've learned about studying corruption in Washington, if you allow something to happen to become normal, they're all going to do it. And they're all going to start taking large payments from foreign entities because of the Biden rule. The Bidens did it. They got away with it. So why can't I do it too?
How much of a governor on saying anything more pointed about the Chinese communists, the sort of things you're documenting, How much of a governor on that among Republicans has Mitch McConnell been? I mean, you documented in your book, Secret Empires, his wife's relationship to his wife's family, and thus his relationship to this Chinese shipping empire and the Chinese Communist Party. So, are people even, sort of China hawks, anti-communist hawks, your Mike Lees of the world, your Rand Pauls of the world, are they afraid to be as specific and as pointed as what you're describing? Because they feel like, well, I don't want to create internal fights within the party, then that's distracting, or for some other reason?
Yeah, no, I think Mitch McConnell is part of that. I think the other part of it is, look, you have very powerful, rich people who are major donors to the Republican Party who have deep pockets and have deep investments in TikTok. One of the biggest donors on the Republican side is a gentleman named Jeff Yass, lives in Pennsylvania. He's the biggest single donor to the Club for Growth, which is a sort of free market libertarian investment firm. He owns 17% of ByteDance, which is the parent company of TikTok. And some people think this is a $1 trillion company, meaning that his stake is $170 billion. And so because of that, frankly, the Club for Growth has taken a position that they don't think anything should be done to TikTok. So it is a business decision, as it is, unfortunately, financial donor pressure. I think Mitch McConnell certainly has laid out pressure. And look, the fact of the matter is, I quote extensively from Chinese military journals describing how they view TikTok as a Trojan horse and the specific ways in which they are trying to manipulate our young people. And so the notion that, well, we should have a discussion about TikTok, are they good or are they bad? They're not debating that in China. They've already decided this is a great, potent tool to use against us, and they are using it. And in my view, the only solution, Trump proposed it in 2020, it was reversed by Joe Biden. The only solution that works is to force the sale of that entity to an American company. You cannot have the CCP controlling the company that is literally piping all of these images and all of these ideas to our young people.
What about our national security agencies? Are they compromised in a material way? I mean, what we've seen their performance over the last 8 years, we've got a lot of the receipts, as they say, from Taibbi and Schellenberger and others. But I mean, if they're focused on fifth column actions against Trump and Catholics who attend the Latin Mass in Virginia, in the case of the FBI, then they can't be focused on these threats or as focused on these threats that you're describing. So I just wonder, how you would describe the performance of national law enforcement and intel agencies in reaction to the threats that you document.
Well, I've received a lot of feedback from people that have worked or are working at FBI, ATF, Homeland Security, who see this every day. The problem is the political leadership that are running these institutions are ultimately political actors. I mean, we want to think that the director of the FBI is just a great Joe Friday kind of guy, but the fact of the matter is that he's appointed by a president and he's making political calculations. And Joe Biden and his administration have made it clear they do not want to single out China. They do not want to challenge them on any of these issues. So it's an enormous problem. You talk to those in the field that are seeing this, that are living it, that are experiencing it, the guys at DEA that tell me, we know this is a Chinese operation, but the guys upstairs don't want to say it for political reasons, is really the crux of the problem. And that's one of the reasons that I wrote this book, because you have to have this conversation and we need to speak earnestly about what's going on, because it is literally killing people. And all the corruption I've written about before, it was about, political actors getting rich and taking actions. This is really a life and death issue, and it's costing us our best and brightest.
Peter Schweizer, president of the Government Accountability Institute. He's the New York Times bestselling author of a number of books, the most recent, as we've been discussing, Blood Money, Why the Powerful Turn a Blind Eye While China Kills Americans. The book, Blood Money, available now. Pick it up. Peter Schweizer, thanks so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having
Joined
me.
by our friend Andrew Klavan, who recently wrote at his Substack, The New Jerusalem, a pretty good think piece, as he always does, thoughtful work, on the use of the language, including proper Shakespeare references, which I always appreciate. Andrew Klavan's an author, screenwriter. He's also the host of The Andrew Klavan Show at the Daily Wire. Andrew joins us now. Andrew, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
It's great to be here, guys. Thanks.
So I mean, I just the contrast this week between what's going on with Milei in Argentina and the memo for just the latest example issued by Tony Blinken.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think people on the right or people who just believe in common sense realize how much the way language is used affects what happens to us. When you pass a law that says every person should be allowed to take birth control pills and not mention the fact that these pills are for women, essentially, you're basically eliminating an entire sex. I mean, the idea that when my friend Matt Walsh asks, what is a woman, that we don't know, that we really have to define that word. We don't have to define that word. We know exactly what it means. What they're doing is they're undermining the entire human experience. They're using a false idea of science. Science tells us that things are not exactly the way we look at them. So you start out and you say, well, gee, the earth looks like it's flat, but it's really round. The sun looks like it's passing over the sky, but it's really the earth that's turning. And then pretty soon you start to say, well, you know, abortion seems like it might be killing a person, but isn't really a person. And you say, well, marriage looks like it should be between a man and a woman, but isn't a guy and a dog, isn't that really a marriage too? And the way they get together. And you start to, you know, incest. What's really wrong? Why it seems wrong that a guy should sleep with his sister, but is it really wrong? And language begins to lose its meaning because reality begins to lose its meaning. And the left has been playing off this philosophy, and it's a genuine philosophy, by the way. They're not just being irrational. They actually don't believe that the things that we see that are wrong are wrong. They think that our perception is always off and can be changed any way they want. And that's why the left plays with language all the time. You know, we're not leftists, we're not socialists, we're progressives. We're progressives, like, you know, emphysema is progressive. And so we're always on our back feet because we doubt our own experience. Science, in a way, has taught us to doubt our own moral experience. But in fact, human beings are made to see right and wrong. You know, we're not always right. We have to think about it. We have to pray on it. We have to have a way of finding our way forward. But
we have to consult Gemini AI to make sure.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you know, that's a really good example in a way, because Gemini AI, people are blaming Gemini AI for saying stupid stuff, but it's just a machine. It's the stuff that was fed into it by human beings that's stupid. And when it comes out and misrepresents reality by showing George Washington as a black person, the guy who programmed the machine should be questioning himself, not the AI. It's not we have to fix the AI. We have to fix the philosophy of the people programming the AI. So my only point, I mean, I think that our Christian background should remind us that when you have a God who can incarnate himself as a human being, there's something about the human experience that is very real. You know, when we think, gee, you know, this feels immoral to me, we should listen to that. We shouldn't be talked out of our morality by people who are talking too fast for us to understand them, by people who have philosophized morality away. You know, we're killing almost 1 million babies a year in this country, and people are going to the polls to vote and saying that's a human right. It's a human right to kill a baby inside you. You know, and the minute you say that, they say, well, it's not a baby. It's a fetus. You know, they change the words because they think that the emotional weight of the words is what matters. But no, you know, what we see is what is, you know, unless you can actually prove that that's not a living person inside your body, that's what it is. And so, I think that we don't understand on the right often enough how much their philosophy holds together if there's no God. If really reality is anything we say it is, if morality is anything we say it is, then the left is right. It's not, you're not a woman because you're born with a woman's body. Richard Levine just has to put on a dress and a string of pearls and he becomes Rachel Levine. You know, they're right about that if we don't think that there is something very, very real about our experiences and the language we use to describe that experience. You know, one of the things I wrote in my piece about that I like to bring up is I don't know how many people still remember the comedian George Carlin, a very funny comedian, but he used to have this routine, the 7 words you can't say on television. And the routine worked like this. He would get up and just start cursing, the string of 7 horrible curse words, until those words stopped meaning anything. And it was very funny. And the point was that we're irrationally banning these words. There's nothing inherently bad about these words. But that's just not true. You shouldn't get your philosophy from comedians. You should get your laugh from comedians, but not your philosophy. It's not true. If I can use the word pine tree and put into your mind the picture of a pine tree, I can use a 4-letter word for sex and dehumanize sex and tell you that sex is just a physical process with no moral, weight to it, with no relational weight to it. That's what happens when you use a 4-letter word for sex. And so words mean things because our experience means things, and we use words as tools to communicate our experience to one another. And when people start to say they don't know what the word woman means, it's because they're not a biologist, as one of our Supreme Court justices said. They're actually saying something very dangerous. They're actually negating our entire experience of life and therefore our moral senses. And they mean to do it. They philosophically believe our moral senses are not worthwhile. And that's the level that we have to fight them on, because if we don't fight them on the philosophical level, we'll basically lose.
So with these words, ever going to go back to normal? Like, I am a mother. I am not a birthing parent or a birthing person. I mean, so...
Or parental unit.
Right.
Well, they go back to meaning what they mean if people have the courage to stand up for them. And this is the problem we have on the right, is that people can be cowed into saying, well, I don't know what a woman means. They can be frightened because they're going to lose their job. They're going to be called down to HR if they don't use the right pronoun. This is why Jordan Peterson is fighting with Canada, not because he's unkind to people who are, mistaken about their sex. It's because he won't be forced to use pronouns that don't describe the world as he sees it, because he trusts his own experience of life. So when women allow themselves to be erased by guys like Dylan Mulvaney, they're actually doing something both wrong and harmful to themselves, but also wrong and harmful to the rest of us. They have to stand up and say, no, you're not a woman. For instance, I don't think any female sports team, any sports team, should play against an opponent that has a man on his team. They should absolutely boycott and forfeit every single game. Every female team across the country should do it. No one should, not just for safety's sake, for reality's sake, for the sake of the dignity of womanhood. It is deeply offensive, just as it's offensive when somebody puts on blackface. It's deeply offensive when Dylan Mulvaney puts on a skirt and makeup and says, oh, I'm a girl, and they put him on the cover of a magazine.
Yeah, but we don't act that way.
That's right.
Well,
that's right. We don't stand up to them.
Well, yeah. So here's the thing: we don't, and we don't even appreciate what you're saying. So it seems to me now, and so we never see it coming. Some of us.
That's right.
We never see pedophiles are what do we call them now? Minor attracted persons. Yeah, yes. Right. I mean, but it's like no. But you say that, somebody's like, what? What's going on? What's happening? So we and to me, I recently wrote about this in the context of what that Politico national correspondent Heidi Priscillo said about Christians versus Christian nationalism. So yes. we allowed marriage to be redefined out of existence, and this is the way to destroy something. Just redefine it out of existence. So marriage, biological sex, and now Christianity and America's origin story is next. And that Politico reporter really gave us an insight when she distinguished between Christians and the Christian nationalists who are Trump supporters. The Christian nationalist is someone who believes that our rights come from God and not the state, essentially, is what she said. And those are the people that are the problem. They're not the true Christians. The true Christians are people that necessarily properly believe that our rights come from government. That's the next. So strip away your understanding of the founding documents, strip away your understanding of Christianity, strip away your belief in God. That's the next, the next threshold they're going to cross.
Right, because see, it's so important. Then it's like we have been talked out of the idea that we can argue from the point of view of God's existence. But it's really up to them to prove that God doesn't exist. We're living in a creation. We're living in an incredibly complex thing. It didn't come out of nothing. If you can show me anything that came out of nothing, I'll believe that the world came out of nothing. It obviously is the creation of a consciousness. So we have to cling to that, because that's the underlying source of our rights and of our moral understanding. And I know it's a difficult thing to get through to people, because we've lived so long in a country where they've said that God is not allowed in the public square. And I think that is where a lot of this begins. And I'm not trying to be a Bible thumping, fundamentalist and say, oh, here's a verse in the Bible, this is how you have to live. That's not the point. The point is that the world that as we understand it, is a spiritual world. There's this intellectual, Yuval Harari, who goes over to the World Economic Forum. They love him there. And he says, people don't have any rights. Cut a person open. You won't find any rights inside him. Well, that's something so stupid that only an intellectual could say it. Of course you don't cut people open and find their rights inside. People are bodies, but those bodies are expressing something more than what is inside them, just like a car is more than the machinery inside them. You can take a car apart, but you can't drive it. You can take a person apart, but he's no longer a person. We are an entire thing, and we are the expression of spirit, and that spirit definitely can be proved to have rights. The thing that the Declaration says is these rights are self-evident. You don't even have to prove them. It is just evident that you have a right to life, because I have a right to life, and that's what makes it so obvious. But these people feel that all the things that we see in one another, the love we feel for one another, the respect we have for one another, the respect we have for people's rights, those things are not there because you can't see them, you can't smell them, you can't touch them. That's a very, very stupid philosophy. And yet it is the philosophy of most of our intellectuals, most of our academics. And the ordinary folks don't have the language with which to fight back, because they use these complicated languages. It sounds like they're saying something important. It sounds like, well, they're too smart for me to argue with. I hear this all the time, by the way. I've traveled across the entire country, and I hear people say, I don't know. I'm not a smart guy. I didn't go to college. I don't have the words to argue with these people. And my feeling is no. You have your common sense. You see what you see. You know what you are. Don't be talked out of this by a bunch of people with credentials but no common sense. It really is important that we begin with God. It really is. And it's so obvious that we're living in a creation that we shouldn't be talked out of it by people who think they're smarter than we are. They're not. They are maybe more educated than we are. They maybe know their field better than we do. But the things that we see, the immorality that we see, the things that our words mean, man, woman, marriage, these are things that we understand and we know. We don't need some professor to tell us they don't exist. It's simple nonsense.
Andrew Klavan, author, screenwriter, host of The Andrew Klavan Show at the Daily Wire, and his Substack is The New Jerusalem. Andrew, thanks as always. Appreciate it.
Great talking to you, Dan. Thanks.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
You're listening to Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer. This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson.
His writings since 1994 and the book called Victory, let alone when he wrote about Disney in 1998. And if you didn't read Reagan's War in 2002, well, what the hell were you doing? How about Do As I Say in 2005? So when I talk about blood money, I love it, like I've loved them all, because he's probably the best investigative reporter this country's ever had. He's Peter Schweizer. Peter, thank you for joining me. How are you?
Oh, Shaun, thanks so much for having me on the show. With that introduction, I might as well just retire. Thank you. That's very kind.
Well, you've been that important for this long. And you've written about the Bushes. You've written about everything, because it's not about these individual players. It's about the integrity of our government, which, as I see it, and it's not just thanks to your books, but your books are eye-opening. I do not believe in one bureaucracy. I do not believe in one politician. In fact, what that represents to me is a mafia. That's how I see it. How do you see it?
Yeah, I mean, look, the Founding Fathers were suspicious of political power, concentrated power. That's why they designed the system of checks and balances that we have. And what's happened, I think, in recent yewe devolved in a bad way from sort of rank and file typical corruption that you expect, which is, you're trying to get a paving contract for your cousin, to global corruption, meaning our national leaders in the United States and Washington, D.C. are actually being corrupted by foreign forces, meaning foreign governments, foreign businessmen, foreign oligarchs, in a way that is deeply, deeply damaging and undermining to the integrity of our system. And when we are under attack now, as I believe we are by China, that corruption translates into inaction and indifference by our leaders. The problem is not just the corruption, it's actually people are dying in the United States as a result of this inaction.
350 a day from just one drug, not only provided with the roots of China, but distributed in conjunction with the cooperation of cartels who also have sworn allegiance to Middle East terrorists like Hamas and Hezbollah. This is something that I think people need to understand. Politicians that take money from China and the rest of these entities are policy whores that are crafting the policy to weaken our nation and strengthen our enemies, which in fact are their benefactors, are they not?
Yeah, so let's take the fentanyl trade. Yes, you are quite right. The cartels play a major role here, but as I show in the book, they're really the junior partners. The fentanyl crisis was created by China, and every link in the chain of fentanyl, whether it's the precursors that arrive from China, we all know that, whether it's the 2,000 Chinese nationals that we know are in a small Mexican town creating the fentanyl out of the precursors for those cartels, whether it's the money laundering for the cartels, which now goes through Chinese state-owned banks. China is the senior partner, the cartels are the junior partner. And the problem is, as I highlight in Blood Money, you have a first family of the United States, the Biden family, that has only one slender degree of separation from the fentanyl trade. So why do I say that? Well, the Chinese gang that set up the Sinaloa cartel in Mexico, the Sinaloa cartel are the kings of fentanyl. Everybody acknowledges that. They're the biggest problem when it comes to spreading this poison in the United States. The criminal gang in China that set them up in the fentanyl trade is called UBG, and the head of the gang is a guy named Zhang Anlo, who goes by the name White Wolf. White Wolf has a business partner, and that business partner happens to have given the Bidens $5 million in 2017 in an interest-free, forgivable loan that the Bidens had never repaid. So given all of that, are we surprised that Joe Biden does not want to call out China on the fentanyl trade? Are we surprised that when he says he raises the matter with President Xi that he does it without pointing fingers? No, we shouldn't be surprised at all. And that's the price of corruption. It's not just Joe Biden, but, he is, of course, the most powerful person in the United States, and it begins with him.
So I've gone through I'm halfway through it because I'm so excited about the book. I've been waiting for it, as I do all of your books. But one thing that you do that most people don't is that you put a bow on everything when it comes to the way in which they monetize this. And when you look at the way in which the cartels have been able to monetize it, it circumvents a lot of what our country pays attention to. They're actually perpetrating arbitrage between currencies, whether it's Mexico and China, or in fact, they've managed to mitigate it into European currencies. They really don't need to operate within the purview of American authorities and their dollar anymore. So in fact, they've joined Brexit, haven't they?
Yeah, no, they have. And look, they are protected. The cartels are protected by some smart decisions that they've made, courtesy of Chinese money launderers who have really given them a more sophisticated way with the money. The other way that they're protected is, if you're a drug cartel, you worry constantly about secure communications, about, the FBI or DEA, eavesdropping on your conversations, or the Department of Justice getting a subpoena and monitoring your communications. Well, lo and behold, the drug cartels, what do? They use Chinese apps and Chinese communication devices where the servers are all based in China, so there's nothing to subpoena. And they know the Chinese are not going to turn these communications over to U.S. law enforcement, so they can operate with impunity. That's what I mean about they're really the junior partners, and it's the Chinese that are the senior partners here. And for this is a replay, a reversal of the opium wars of the 19th century, where it is still drilled into people, in students today in China, that the opium wars really took China from a pretty powerful country in the early 1800s to, by the turn of the 19th century, by the turn of the 20th century, it was in fact a diminished power, with estimated 25% of the Chinese population addicted to opium. They believe that it was a strategy to hold China down. They are now using it as part of what they call disintegration warfare, which is to really tear America apart. They're fanning the flames of some of the problems that we have, making them worse because they think it's a way that they can defeat us. And it's working pretty darn good right now.
That's the point. It's working. And, this is something that you realize when you're a kid from Chicago, the interwoven nature of what I call the Democrat Mafia Party and the Chinese. The Chinese have been very strategic to buy very important politicians. They start out locally, but they always have their eye on nationally. And that explains why they're so comfortable, because they have a stacked bench. When you look at Gavin Newsom, when you look at some of the players, even the Pritzkers, and when you look at the way in which they're comfortable in the future of their strength in our country, aren't they?
Yeah, no, that's right. I mean, they cultivate relationships early, and they try to build people up, and they appeal to, their financial interests. I mean, I'm not suggesting that Joe Biden or Gavin Newsom are, CCP member wannabes. They don't have to be. They have to be transactional politicians that, see what is for their political benefit. And if it's for their political and personal enrichment, to get along with China, to not challenge them on things, they're glad to do it. And Gavin Newsom's an example of that. I mean, I could go on and on about Newsom, but just when he was mayor of San Francisco, he appointed as the head of the economic redevelopment in Chinatown a gentleman named Alan Leung, who happened to be a dragonhead, a mafia leader in Chinese organized crime involved in the drug trade. Gavin Newsom, as mayor, befriended another dragonhead mafia leader in Chinese organized crime named Shrimp Boy, and he actually took taxpayer money and sent it to his nonprofit. And of course, it turned out that he was involved in a murder for plot hire, a drug dealing, etc. He had on his transition team as mayor a third individual who later turned out was connected with Chinese organized crime and the drug trade. When he as mayor set up something called China SF, this was to bring Chinese investment dollars into the Bay Area, he could have picked any businessman to partner with in China that he wanted to. Picked a guy named Vincent Lo, who it was already known had ties to Chinese organized crime, and yet he's the one that Gavin Newsom partnered with. And of course, some of the early businesses that came into San Francisco when he was mayor were linked to Chinese organized crime. So again, when Gavin Newsom talks about China and the fentanyl trade, fentanyl deaths in California since 2016 are up 1,200%. And yet Gavin Newsom doesn't talk about China's involvement. He said we can't finger point to China. There's a reason, and the reason is he has these long associations with individuals who are connected with these criminal networks, and it would be deeply embarrassing for him politically for that to come out and for that to explode. So he would rather remain silent, even though Californians die every single day from this poison.
I mean, what's staggering is the amount of Americans. It's truly staggering. It's more than twice the amount of soldiers we lost in Vietnam. But this is something that somehow is not really at the forefront of the outrage, let alone the fact that our bureaucracies have been ignorant to these relationships. Now, I understand they have plausible deniability because they have found a very ingenious way to monetize and to keep the communications away from our bureaucracies in this country. But it's undeniable that Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party are unaware of this. They have to be, correct?
Yeah, no, they are. Personal story about President Xi. I point out in the book that President Xi of China was for a long time the local party boss in Fujian province, which happens to be the focal point of Chinese organized crime. And there are multiple stories in there I recount of Chinese organized crime figures wanted on serious charges in the United States that would flee to Fujian province when he was there, knowing that Xi would protect them. The other thing to point out is that President Xi, reveres his father, and his father, one of his most famous acts was as a 14-year-old boy trying to poison and kill his teacher because his teacher wasn't sufficiently revolutionary. So Xi certainly doesn't mind these kinds of tactics. And when we have actually identified Chinese officials, these are people that are in the CCP, these are people that are advisors to the government. When we identify these figures as being involved in the fentanyl trade, what happens? Well, there was a gentleman in 2021 named Mr. Wan, W-A-N, who was identified as such. He was sanctioned by the Biden administration. And of course, the Biden administration says, oh, these sanctions are the way to really get at the Chinese. Well, after those sanctions were given and the charges were made, 3 months later, Mr. Wan was given an award by the CCP. And he gave a rousing speech in China about how he was using his organized crime networks, and he knew other people that were, to help China in its competition with the United States. So they're aware of this. They know it. They use the term murder with a borrowed knife. Find a way to kill your opponent, but make it look like it's not you. And that is exactly what they are doing when it comes to fentanyl. Fentanyl overdoses, deaths are now the leading cause of death for people under the age of 45 in the United States.
Now, this is something that we've all known, the millennium of shame, I believe it's called, right, in China, where they went 100 years into the dark ages after thriving. They've always carried a grudge on that. They carry a grudge against Europe mainly, but America as well. And, you know, I remember reading in your book, Reagan's War, how he had a 40-year career of defeating communism. And I think we celebrated the defeat of communism too prematurely, because I don't think we understood that communism was able to morph. And it was in your other book, Secret Empires, where you name these oligarchs in America. And that's really what they've become. They're untouchable. Their money is untraceable. And they're all politicians. They're not businessmen. Did we celebrate the idea that we were beating communism too early after you've done the research and all the footnotes?
No, I think that's a great point. And what you have in China is a communist system. And what they did was they created kind of a hybrid. I call it a market-Leninist system as opposed to a Marxist-Leninist system. And what do I mean? They use the strengths of state capitalism to grow their economy. But this is still a regime that reveres Karl Marx, Lenin, and Mao. And they have laid out in their strategy, it's called disintegration warfare. They talk about it explicitly. I quote in Blood Money repeatedly from Chinese military documents from the Ministry of Propaganda, what they're doing with TikTok. I mean, they say it. We don't have to speculate and theorize what they think, because I quote them extensively in the book, and we need to take them at their word in a very, very serious way. So I think that's a very astute observation. We celebrated the defeat of the Soviet Union as the end of communism. What we're seeing in China, I would argue, is a much more serious opponent than the Soviets, because at this point, we have now already lost several million people to the actions of the CCP, much higher body count than we ever faced when we confronted the Soviet Union during the Cold War.
You broke the story of Joe Biden's sat phone that he's had in one of the 20 LLCs. You know, you don't really write books, you write indictments. And I'm wondering, with this latest book, have people who are important enough to do something, have senators and congressmen reached out to you and said, Peter, we really want to go over this and we really want to bust the doors open? Or are we all kind of victims of this charade we pretend is a republic? I mean, what do they do? The information you've kicked out, I've made a career out of, and I'm serious about that. When you see senators and congressmen twiddle their thumbs as they continue to write blank checks for our destruction, are you in shock that the Speaker of the House hasn't called you up and said, Peter, I want to sit down with you, I'll fly you out, I'll fly to you, I want to go over this, we need to kick the doors in?
Yeah, I definitely have had some of the oversight. I've had the oversight committee. I've had 4 senators that I've had contact with regards to the findings in the book. They talk about wanting to do things, which I think is good, which is great. I think the problem is it's honestly an uphill battle, because I think a lot of these elected officials, if they don't have financial entanglements that like Biden, or you could also talk about Mitch McConnell, if they don't have those entanglements, a lot of them there are go along and get along. And look, once you look at the reality of what China's doing to the United States and to the people, you can't have a normal relationship with this government as long as they're doing it. You can't say, well, let's sit down and have a discussion about cultural exchange. Let's have a conversation about trade policy. you're killing millions of Americans. No, we can't have that kind of conversation. So part of the inertia is, frankly, just go along to get along elected officials who don't want the heavy lift of making tough choices. But I still have to believe, Shaun, and I think you do too, there is still a remnant of people in Washington, and you can get some of those who seemingly right now have their finger in the wind. You can get them to pay attention when they hear from their constituents, when they hear from local media, outlets like yours, that people care about this stuff, it actually matters to them. And that, I think, is the key. The worst thing that people can do, is say, oh, nothing's going to ever happen. That defeatism guarantees our defeat. If that is the attitude you adopt, we are in for a complete collapse of the United States.
Now, what tipped you off about Mitch McConnell? Was it just the policies where he sold out to China, or the fact that his first wife, Cheryl Redmond, looked like Newt Gingrich and Elena Chao looks like a Chinese Mata Hari? What tipped you off to Mitch McConnell and his link to the Chinese Communist Party? Because Elaine Chao's father seems to be worth billions of dollars since she married Mitch McConnell. I mean, do we need more evidence than his strong jawline or Cheryl Redmond's looks like Newt Gingrich? What do you say?
Well, the tip-off for me was a trip that I ran across in 1993, as reported by the Chinese state media. In 1993, Mitch McConnell was a young senator from Kentucky. Barely any elected officials were going to China. This is only 4 years after Tiananmen Square. But lo and behold, I ran across this media camp, and Mitch McConnell, his new wife, Elaine Chao, and her father, James Chao, who ran a small shipping business at that time called Foremost, went to China, and they were there not as official visitors as a U.S. senator and his family. They were there as guests of the Chinese State Shipbuilding Corporation. And as the name implies, this shipbuilding corporation is state-owned. It's also the biggest military contractor in China. And the article talked about how essentially they were there to negotiate a deal. And the deal was the Chinese government said, we will build the ships for Foremost. We will finance the construction of ships. We'll provide crews for those ships. And we'll provide contracts for those ships. And lo and behold, over the last 30 years, they have made a boatload of money. And Mitch McConnell as well. He received a gift from his father-in-law between $5 and $25 million. So the problem is, if Mitch, exactly. Well, here's the thing. If Mitch McConnell says or does something that really ticks off Beijing, they can destroy that family business overnight. Everybody in the shipping business knows it. So that's what Mitch McConnell has done. The family's become wealthy, but they have leverage over him, and that's why you are not going to see him take the lead on these issues.
Yeah, wealthy's a Mercedes-Benz and not worrying about next month's bills. These guys are billionaires. We just have an idea, the tip of the iceberg, but you continue to bring the information, undeniable. I've been a fan for decades. It's always an honor to speak to you. And I'm wondering, what's the title of your next book? Because I know how your mind works. You're already on the next one. Is it going to be Corruption is the Fountain of Youth? Because these old crooked bastards never seem to die. Do you believe Mitch McConnell? I'm going to give it up in November, but I'm going to continue to be a senator for 3 years. Are you kidding me? I blame Viagra and Cialis. Maybe that should be the title of your next book. What do you think?
Yeah, that could be, bursting out on Capitol Hill, something like that.
Yes. Yeah, no, how crooked do you have to be? Yes. Yeah, I love it.
Exactly. No, it's, we're always looking for stories. We're always researching. The research is my favorite part of this. So I'll, on the next book, I'll probably research for a year and a half with my team. And then I'll spend 6 months writing it. But we'll see. There's a lot of challenges we face, but I always tell people, I know reading my books are going to make you angry, but hopefully they're also going to enlighten you. And the key thing is action. When Paul Revere cried and said the British are coming, people just didn't get angry and say, oh, well, we're going to lose, the British are coming. People actually got busy and did something about it. And that's what I hope my writing does, is it motivates people, gives them awareness, and is a call to action.
Yeah, you're more than a writer. You're a warrior for Americanism. I so appreciate you, Peter Schweizer. Thank you very much, my friend.
Thanks, Shaun, for having me. I appreciate it.